So in this episode, I speak with Loz Moore. Loz does some unbelievable things for charity, unbelievable adventurous expeditions with ex-veterans, and he talks all about his military background and the difficulties and the challenges coming away from the military and how he's actually got into this new part of his life. Loz, thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, Adam. I really appreciate you inviting me on, and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I've obviously looked into a lot of the things that you've done. You've done some pretty unbelievable things and raised obviously a lot of money for charity and stuff, so it's going to be very nice getting into that. I'd like to go back to the beginning first, if that's okay, and probably pick it up really from where you started into your kind of military career and how you got into that, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think joining the army was always inevitable for me because my father was in the parachute regiment, and so growing up he would tell me a lot about his adventures and some of these stories of, you know, very, very exciting things for a young boy to hear about. The esprit de corps was fantastic, and I just loved the idea of being together with that band of brothers and being able to go off and, you know, serve your country, have an adventure, and everything else that entailed, really. So like I say, it was inevitable that I would go in the military and probably the army, which is what I ended up doing after university.
So how young was you when you really first started getting like that thought of doing that? Like, do you remember the beginning?
Yeah, I remember. So he used to take us on onto the hills, and I think it was a bit therapeutic for him as well. And he obviously wanted to pass on some of the knowledge to me and my brother. So literally 9 and 11-year-old boys out on the Peak District on their own in the mist with a compass and like a little old metal framed rucksack.
Yeah.
Completely unheard of nowadays, but you know, at the time it was kind of acceptable. So it all started from then. And I remember walking to school quite a few times, looking at my silhouette, imagining I was a soldier. And that actually came back to remind me when I was in Afghanistan. And I looked at my silhouette as I was walking across a particular field and thought, oh my God, I remember doing that as a child walking to school. And here I am now actually doing it for real. So it's always been in me.
It's always been there for you. Did you have a little like group of friends and stuff at the time when you was growing up that all had the same kind of idea as well? Yeah,
absolutely. So we had like a lot of woods and you know, forests where I grew up on the edge of the Peak District. So our main sort of pastime was going off playing manhunt in the woods. It was always based on that combat and survival type mentality, you know, playing soldiers, going off into the hills, learning that sort of survival skills from the earliest of ages.
Yeah.
And then when I was at school, the natural progression was to go into the cadets. And at the time, cadets was incredible. There was less of the health and safety that there is now, probably a bit of a bigger budget. So we were off flying chipmunk planes and, you know, shooting 2.2 rifles and just having the best time with that. And so quite a few of the guys that I went through the cadets with ended up in various parts of the military as well.
So how did you then get into it fully? So what was like the first steps of getting into the military for you properly?
Yeah, so after the cadets, I've sort of cracked on with schooling, ended up going to university and studying military history, which did lend itself really well to when I went into the army itself. I was actually too late to join the officer training corps at university because I didn't sign up until year 2. And so they said, oh no, you should have started straight away in year 1. So I ended up going into the territorial army instead as a soldier. And that was the Kings and Cheshire Regiment based in Ardwick, Manchester. And it was at the time that the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts were starting to warm up. So we really sort of had an eye on what was going to happen. And then I think that the natural progression for me there was to apply for the regular army. And because I'd been to university, I thought, why not? I'm going to try and apply to go to Sandhurst, which is the officer training academy for, you know, people going into the regular army as an officer.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to get accepted. So, in 2005, I think that was like when I was finishing university, put my papers in to apply, and I was very, very fortunate to be accepted to go to Sandhurst. So, typically it wouldn't be someone like myself from a normal state school background that would get that opportunity, but I did. I was lucky, and I thought, you know what, there's going to be less people telling me what to do, which has always been sort of part of my mentality towards whatever, you know, going into leadership positions, etc. And so I wholeheartedly grasped that opportunity and ran with it, and so the rest is really history after that.
How long was you in the army for?
12 years in total. So I did 2 years in the Territorial Army, and then I went to Sandhurst, and I did 10 years. But I'd got what was called a regular commission, which meant that I had a guaranteed job up until 55.
Okay.
So for me, that was, all I was ever going to do. It's all I'd ever wanted to do. I was doing it, and I was good at it, and I was going to do it for the rest of my adult life until retirement. So I was happy and, progressing quite nicely. But unfortunately, when I joined, we were in the midst of the Iraq conflict and the Afghanistan conflict. So when we were at Sandhurst training, the guys that had finished, so it's like you basically it's a bit like a school. So every 3 months there's an intake, finishers and commissioners, and join the army. So we knew that the intakes ahead of us were going straight onto operations. So it was very real what was going to happen as soon as we finished this time at Sandhurst. And just to give you a bit of an idea of what that place is, it's like a big old grand complex, like an old boarding school. And it's very much steeped in sort of Victorian traditions and history. So big grand pillars and entrances, and there's lots of memorials to all of the exploits of the British Army across hundreds of years. Yeah. So you very much know the heritage that you're joining and the lineage of, achievements that have come before you. So it really instills in you that sense of pride. And it does set you up for what you are then being given the honour of doing as a commissioned officer, leading men on operations. So as I say, we were very much in the thick of campaigns at that time, and we knew that as soon as we finished, we were going to go on to sort of specific training to whichever part of the army we were going, and then we would be going on operations, which is what happened exactly to myself.
And throughout your time, what were some of the kind of key things that you learned throughout that time at in the military and at the army? Yeah,
so Sandhurst is known as one of the preeminent leadership schools in the world, and it's got a very good pedigree of taking people from various backgrounds. Although primarily sort of a lot of the people come from the boarding school background. And it's quite interesting in terms of what I'm now doing with adventurous training, that a lot of those students, that come from boarding school backgrounds, they've already got like quite a good understanding of character education, where it's more about trying to put people in challenging positions, because it'll teach them more about their own resilience and how they're able to deal under pressure with complex scenarios and problem solving. And so that it's almost an extension of that type of education, where it's done on an army model, but it's trying to get you to understand how capable you are of leading others, of making sound plans, but also being able to fail. Because if you can fail in training, it means that you're less likely to fail. As long as you learn your lesson, it's less likely to fail in the real thing. So they're trying to put you under pressure, they're trying to see you crack, and then they're trying to build on that continuously throughout the year, so that they've given you the best chance of being able to step straight into a platoon or a troop and do well at your job. So I learned a lot about resilience, about communication, about being able to plan, about being able to operate under pressure, make mistakes and not let them eat me up, and then be able to just keep moving forward towards your goal. And I think a big part of that is sometimes we don't have all the information, but we have to make a plan. And it's better to make a good plan in time rather than an amazing plan too late. So it teaches you about just trying to get whatever information you can and saying, right, I'm going to go with this. And if it's wrong, I'm going to have the confidence to change it, rather than sticking to a plan, even though it's going way off track. So in a nutshell, that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to make you capable of operating on your own and keeping the people who are under your responsibility as safe as possible.
Yeah, it makes sense. Coming towards like why it ended. What happened there? How come the military career ended for you?
So when I finished at Sandhurst, I went straight into the infantry battle school, which is like my sort of specialist training.
Yeah.
And then from there, Northern Ireland, which is where the regiment I chose to join, the Cheshire Regiment, were based. And that was at the end of the 30-year Operation Banner campaign in Northern Ireland. So I went over there, but already our eyes were on Iraq because that's where we knew we were going 6 months later. So we were on an operational tour, but training for another operational tour. And we went out to Iraq, and at the time, the Rifles Regiment were, taking a bit of a pasting in Basra. So it was very clear on the news every day what we were going into. And so whilst the situation slightly changed by the time we got there, it was still a real war zone, and there's explosions, and, it's a real baptism of fire. But even as we were sort of coming to the end of that tour, we knew we were then going to go to Afghanistan because the army's quite small and it's got a lot of commitments, so you're very busy. Went to Afghanistan in 2010, and that was a really challenging tour. It was a summer tour, so temperatures are reaching 50 degrees some points during the summer. You've got probably, 50 kilos of kit on you at any time. You're operating in real harsh conditions. You're out on the ground in like firefights literally every time you go out of camp. And I remember from the first patrol I went on, we got into a firefight, and it stayed that way until the end of the tour. That particular summer tour, for everyone that was involved, my regiment, which had then become the Mercian Regiment because of amalgamation, we lost 14 killed, and there was, I think it was an attrition rate of 50% battle casualties from our unit alone of 700, 800 men. So everyone was, getting hurt, and there was lots of replacements coming in. It was a very high pressure situation, and for myself as a leader, I'm trying to keep my men as calm as possible, and there were circumstances where I hadn't dealt with that before either. Someone that I'd trained with for 2 years being killed, we find out about it on the radio. You have to tell the lads, one of their best friends has just been killed, go around the corner, have a little cry, come back, we need to go out on patrol again. And I remember seeing, certain guys throwing up, literally, knowing that they've got to go back out through the gate. And I'm trying to keep them all calm. Come on, you're with me. I'm keeping you safe. And I would do things that perhaps an officer shouldn't do or should do, which is like lead from the front. So that maybe there's an explosion and everyone's like, I'm not going through that next. Like, right, come on, follow me then. And I think it's called inspirational leadership, which is the term for how I guess my leadership style is, which is lead from the front, be prepared to do something that you would expect or want someone else to do. So not expecting people to do stuff that you're not prepared to do yourself. And it worked well for me, and it's continued to work well, beyond the military. But all of that's based on that learning that I had at Sandhurst as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Would you say the training that you did have prepared you well for that situation?
Yeah, 100%. And some of the things that you're doing at the time, when you sat in the woods in Wales getting rained on for 2 weeks, you're thinking, what am I doing here? Why have I signed up for this? And some of the tactics as well, you think these are like World War II era tactics. But I remember actually doing those exact tactics that we'd done in Wales in what was called the Green Zone in Afghanistan, because it's like a fertile area in between the desert and the river. And it's like, bloody hell, they were right. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And they do, because, the British have got a very strong history and pedigree within military campaigning, and all of that lessons and the training has been distilled down through to, modern day. And that's why when you look at the military now, it can seem a bit anachronistic or, old fashioned, but there's a reason why all of that's done the way that it's done.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I don't think humans are really designed to be in that type of intensity of stress or trauma. And so came back from that tour in Afghanistan. I'd had a Dear John on that tour from my wife at the time, which is, a letter saying, I'm leaving you, I've got a better option. So that takes its toll as well. And I came back. Went back to Afghanistan another time in 2013, and it was in a slightly different role, but you're still, in a pretty dangerous environment. And I think that, all of that in such a condensed period of time, plus personal life stuff going on.
Yeah.
I've got 3 children by this point. I'm trying to be a good dad, trying to, build new relationships. And I think that the stress just caused like an implosion. So in 2015, I got diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting one because you can be given a label, and there's many labels out there. And I think that sometimes does it injustice, because I don't believe that there's a one size fits all, especially when it comes to mental health. You can say, well, these are some of the symptoms that this category of mental health conditions have, but they don't apply universally to everybody. And that, for me, when I was looking at PTSD and I was looking at the symptoms, I was thinking, I don't get flashbacks. I don't have any guilt of what I did on operational tours. I think I made a lot of, all good decisions, and I kept as many of my men safe as possible. So I don't have any guilt over things that happened whilst I was there doing that role. And so because I didn't adhere to all of the symptoms, I thought, am I just faking this? Is this, have they got this right? But I knew that something was wrong. And see, like these glasses here, I think that your stress will continue to fill up the glass until it's overflowing. And then every tiny little bit of stress, even if previously it wouldn't have bothered you at all, it just causes it to overflow. And I think that's why I needed that period to completely empty the vessel of stress, which is what I've probably done in the 10 years since I left. But at that time, I knew I'd got to the point where I couldn't deal with stress, whether it was the bins getting put out on a Monday morning, or whether it was, the missus at the time asking me, whether I'd made her a coffee, and couldn't cope. And I don't think it's even necessary to try and identify where the stress came from. It came, and it changed me. But also as a result, it basically defined the end of my military career, because I got a letter saying you are no longer suitable to be an infantry officer. And that was a hard, pill to swallow, because especially when it wasn't just a job for me, it was a vocation, a life choice. And it was also the thing that I expected to do until retirement. So when I was told that I would have to leave the military, it created a lot of chaos in my life for quite a period of time afterwards. I'd lost the sense of identity of who I was. I lost my sense of pride. I lost access to my children. I lost my income. And I think that for most people, having a lack of finances is probably the greatest cause of stress in their lives. And it certainly was for me, because it's very difficult to do anything else to help yourself to move forward, to improve your life, if you've got no money and you can't pay your bills. And so I found myself sort of sitting back on my sofa in a house that I had in Manchester, thinking, I'm going to lose this house soon because I can't even pay the mortgage. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, because I'd never considered doing anything else. I can't see my kids, which is probably the greatest source of peace and joy and, sanity in my life. I'm going to start drinking. And I think a lot of people would do that. It's like a default self-medication. I'm having a bad time, I'm just going to get drunk. But then that becomes a vicious cycle, because then more labels come along. Oh, he's an alcoholic, he's, a narcissist, or whatever labels people want to put on you. And none of it's actually helpful or identifies, what the root cause is. It's more just layer upon layer and layer of stress, which actually makes the situation worse. And that's the position that I found myself in. I'd lost my career, didn't have a clue what I was going to do, and knew I was sinking quickly. And so that was a point in my life, and I won't sort of stray too much into spirituality, but it's played a massive part in my life and, what's happened since to me, finding God, finding a higher power. And I'd also had quite a few strange experiences when I was in the military, which allowed me to think along those lines when I really needed to find something greater than me.
Yeah.
And just to give an example, I remember being on patrol and having a voice in my head, whether it was a spidey sense, whether it was God speaking to me, saying, don't go left. I'm like, I'm going to listen to that. So we take the patrol right, explosion occurs to the left where I was actually planning on going. And you're like, when you sit and think about that, it's like, what was that? How did that happen? And
Yeah.
can't explain it apart from to just accept that there is a power greater than me. And so when I was really struggling and I found myself drinking, I remember, at a certain point sort of praying and saying, look, God, if you can help me out of this hole, I promise you I will dedicate my life to you in whichever way you see fit and try and serve others. And, essentially that's what's motivated me ever since, really.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, really. Thank you for sharing it. And I think the next step is to kind of go on to what it is that you do now. Mm-hmm. So obviously you do give back and you give a lot to a lot of people through some unbelievable things that you do. So are you okay to share a bit about what it is that you do now?
Yeah,
some of them experiences.
Yeah, so I think for myself, because I'd kind of surrendered to this position I was in, and I thought, right, you know what, no one's going to save me. I need to now put the hard work in myself and take ownership of the situation I find myself in, because it's pointless blaming her or him or whatever. Let's just accept it, figure out how to move forward. And so I almost created a self-help guide for myself to try and move through all of these different myriad problems that I had. And I laid it out it's just the way my brain works. If I lay out a different plan of, okay, these are all the problems, I'm going to break them down into bite-sized chunks and then work through them sequentially. And I did that, and I thought, well, I made the theory, and then it took quite a while to work through that process because it's harder to put it into practice. But I felt like I was onto something. And I thought if it worked for me, especially considering, in my own opinion, where I was starting from, mm-hmm. maybe it would help others as well. So I decided to create an initial social enterprise, which was based on helping people from the military into a new career in the construction industry. But rather than just giving, them their CVs to a construction company or, very obvious routes, I designed it based on that self-help guide to mm-hmm. help them to figure out why they couldn't get their own jobs. And it was almost, trying to figure out mindset, what was holding someone back, what were their motivations, what skills did they have and transferable skills from the military, and where would they be best applied. And the reason why I picked the construction industry, because I felt that there was a really good match between the two, and I'd started working in that industry as well.
Yeah.
So it was an obvious, and it still stands true that it's a really good fit for people to leave the military and go into. So I ended up doing that for a number of years, but almost mirroring my own journey. I think once you've helped someone to get an income and they can start to stand on their own feet financially, you're then moving into more of a maintenance section, which mm-hmm. is how do you keep normal and saying, oh, not normal, but how do you keep well?
Okay.
And so if you look at the adventurous training group within the British Army or the British military, they've understood for a long time that if you take a group of people and you put them outside of the comfort zone in a particularly arduous, adventurous environment, kayaking or climbing or caving or whatever, it brings out all of those really good characteristics that you'd find in military training. So resilience, teamwork, leadership, problem solving, dealing with pressure. And so with that in mind, I wanted to create a new program for people based on adventurous training. Because if you look at health, most people think of, your physical health, maybe your mental health.
Yep.
But actually there's a few more parts to it. There's the nutritional, medicinal, social, and even your spiritual health. And I think that if you look at all of that in tandem, adventurous activities in the great outdoors ticks all those boxes.
Yeah.
And also because I had a particular passion for military history, I thought, why not do that within, take a famous commando raid, and then learn all about that. So we could take a Second World War example of where some commandos had kayaked down a river in France and blown up some German ships. Learn about it, design an expedition based on that operation, and then take a group of guys or girls on that expedition and actually get all of those health benefits. Because if you're paddling down a river, you're probably going to be really focused on your physical health to make sure that you're capable of doing it. You know, your nutritional health is going to improve, your social health because you're doing it with a group of guys, and all these different aspects are just going to, you know, see a massive benefit overall to the individual. And it's worked really well. And I'd done that just personally. So I'd walked to Everest Base Camp and I'd done some treks in the jungle and stuff. But then still having that leadership mentality in mind, and especially within the military community or the armed forces community, because I think that people who support the military people, even if they haven't served themselves, are as important as, you know, your former service people. So we set up a social enterprise called Cockleshell 22, and it was exactly designed to do that, to provide overseas expeditions based on commando raids for members of the armed forces family. And it's just grown from strength to strength. We hadn't even envisioned that it was going to be particularly, you know, it might have just been a one-shot deal, and picked a particular expedition based on the Operation Frankton, which is known as the Cockleshell Heroes. It was a famous film in the 1950s. And I remember sitting down in a bar where all like great ideas come to fruition with a couple of former Royal Marines, Matt and Steve. And we started throwing around these ideas of, you know, doing an expedition. And we were getting told by a lot of people it wouldn't be possible. You can't do it. No, it's not. You're not able to do it. The tides are too strong. You know, the French authorities won't let you do it. And we thought, well, actually, let's just do it. You know, we're a group of civvies. No one can really tell us no. And we ended up doing it. We raised a load of money for charity. We ended up on the BBC with a crew following us around for the whole duration of the trip. And just had the most incredible experience. We did it for the 80th anniversary of that particular raid. But then a really bizarre circumstance occurred at the same time. We just kayaked into Bordeaux port, and we were dragging the kayaks out onto the side of the harbour. And a French girl comes up to us and says, I'm from a French TV company. And I've just, you know, seen your exploits coming down the river. I was wondering whether you wanted to do it again for us next year, because we're going to do a documentary on it. And see, we passed email addresses and thought, not hear anything of it. Fast forward to about 2 months ago, we've just aired on Sky History Channel a 4-part TV series based on these commando raids. And we ended up providing the safety team, a load of extras, worked as the assistant director on the show and the choreographer. And that had all just come about completely by fluke, because a group of guys had sat around in a pub and had a couple of beers and come up with an idea. So yeah, it's just bizarre how like one thing will lead to another. And even speaking to yourself today, you know, it's like just random phone calls that ends up with opportunities. You know.
That's it. And I think sometimes when you've got such good intentions of doing everything, I think just these things sometimes happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, you're just on that path, and you clearly are. And I think the final thing I wanted to ask you really was firstly, where can people find you best, and what's next for you? What's the next kind of part of the plan?
Yeah, so I mean, talking about what Cockleshell 22 does, and our website is www.cockleshell22.com. Okay. People can find us on there or social media channels, and would love to hear from anyone who would like to get involved in one of our expeditions, because we always want to have new people come on with them. And if it sounds like something that you're particularly interested in, we've done expeditions to the Falkland Islands, we've done a couple to Norway, and then in regards to what we're doing next, we've got a really developed plan. Well, we've got 2 developed plans. One is going to take a cycle event through northern France next June in time for D-Day, and it's going to go along a lot of the key battle areas of the parachute regiment during World War II. And that's going to be a really exciting event, especially because we will finish the ride at the British Army Memorial in Normandy in time for the D-Day commemorations. So that's going to happen in June next year. And then the more challenging or stretch expedition is based on an operation called Operation Jaywick in World War II. And it was done by a group of Australian commandos after the fall of Singapore. And they decided to get on an old fishing trawler and sail across to these little islands near Singapore, at which point they got these kayaks back in the water and went and blew up some Japanese vessels in Singapore harbour, and then made their way back to Australia.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the expedition. And we're sort of quite far along, but also because of the success of the first TV series of commando missions, if we do get a commission for season 2, we're going to hopefully tie those in together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is bizarre even to be talking about, because we as a group of former veterans, former Royal Marines, former Army guys, former Royal Air Force, sort of came together because we realised the huge benefits individually, but also for our families of doing these activities, because it can seem quite selfish. I'm going away on an expedition again, but actually, if you come back a happier person, a better husband, a better partner, a better father, a better worker or employer, it can only be beneficial. And it's when we speak to the wives of some of the participants or beneficiaries, and they say, "Oh my God, he's a completely changed man as a result of this," and you know that you're on the right track. So we're going to continue to provide the expeditions and also the UK-based training because they need to be prepared for whatever it is that they're going to do. But all of that provides that social continuity as well, because people can come together throughout the year, train towards these expeditions, and then go and do them. And that may take 18 months, but actually for, if you can give someone a joyous experience for 18 months and it makes them a better person, then we have to keep going.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing everything today. It was really, really nice to just listen to your story and some of your experience that you've been through. And what you're doing now is unbelievable. You're doing an amazing job. So I really do hope everyone carries on looking at the stuff that you're doing, because it's all good. You should be very proud of yourself.
Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Adam. Cheers.